My husband won the house in court, and my best friend started calling it our place. She said, "Don't be bitter." So I cleaned every room, handed over the keys, and left one hidden problem behind. I'm sitting on the back patio right now, watching the lights from Atlanta blur through the trees. The house is quiet again, but that quiet feels different from the silence that used to crush me. Back then, it felt like abandonment. Now it feels like ownership. Yesterday, my mother stood in my kitchen with her purse still hanging from her shoulder, looking at me like she had walked into the wrong house and found the wrong daughter living inside it. Was it worth becoming this kind of person? She asked. I knew my answer before she finished the question. That was what scared her. To understand why she thinks I crossed a line, you have to understand what they took from me first. Not just the house, not just my marriage, and not just my best friend. They took the version of me who believed that if you worked hard, kept proof, paid your share, and stayed decent, the truth would eventually matter. That woman does not live here anymore. 3 years before everything fell apart, the house was only a dream spread across our kitchen table. Brian and I used to sit there with takeout containers, arguing over window sizes, cabinet finishes, flooring samples, and whether the tall glass wall facing the backyard was beautiful or ridiculous. I thought those arguments were love. I thought building something together meant we were building a life. The land came from Brian's family. It sat outside Atlanta in a quiet neighborhood with old trees, wide yards, and houses that looked like people had planned to stay forever. Brian said the lot was the one meaningful thing his family had ever given him. When he suggested we build there instead of buying somewhere else, I asked if the legal side was simple. He kissed my forehead and told me not to worry. "Let me handle the family paperwork," he said. "You already handle everything else." I believed him. That was my first mistake. I worked in a lab, and the job demanded long hours, patience, and a mind that noticed small things. I knew how to follow patterns, question results, and spot contamination before it ruined an entire process. But in my own marriage, I ignored every warning because I trusted the man sleeping beside me. The house became my obsession. I worked overtime, took extra shifts, and poured nearly everything I had into upgrades Brian said we deserved. Better flooring, custom lighting, smart climate controls, matte black fixtures, huge windows that made sunset look expensive. Michelle loved those windows. Michelle was my best friend. She was the kind of friend who brought soup when I was sick and wine when I was angry. She knew what my grief sounded like when my father died. She stood beside me at my wedding and cried during her speech, calling Brian the only man I trusted with my girl. When the house was finished, she walked through it slowly, touching the kitchen island and smiling like she was touring a magazine spread. "This place is unreal," she said. "You two are disgustingly lucky." I laughed because I thought she was happy for me. I didn't know she was already imagining herself inside it. The first sign was small, which almost made it worse. I was changing the sheets on a Saturday morning when something slipped from behind the bed frame and tapped against the floor. I thought it was a loose screw or a button. When I bent down, I found a small silver earring with a dark green stone. For a few seconds, I only stared at it in my palm. Then I recognized it. Michelle had worn those earrings to dinner at our house 2 months earlier. She had made a joke about buying jewelry whenever she wanted to feel like she was making better life choices. I sat on the edge of the bed with that earring in my hand until my fingers went cold. When Brian came home that evening, he walked in like it was any other day. He set his keys on the kitchen island, loosened his tie, and asked what we were doing for dinner. I held out my hand. "What is this?" He looked at the earring. For 1 second, I waited for panic. Shame. Even a clumsy lie would have been more human than what he gave me. He sighed. "Amanda, don't do this." "Don't do what?" "Turn this into a scene." The room felt too bright, too still, too clean. "Is it Michelle?" I asked. His face barely changed. "That's not how I wanted you to find out." It was such a polished sentence that I knew he had practiced it. Maybe not in those exact words, but somewhere in his mind, he had prepared a version of this moment where he sounded calm and I sounded unstable. "How long?" I asked. He rubbed his forehead. "Does it matter?" "Yes. Almost a year." Almost a year meant birthdays, dinners, backyard barbecues, and late-night texts from Michelle asking if I was okay. It meant the night she sat on my bathroom floor while I cried about feeling distant from Brian. It meant she had been comforting me about the wound she was helping make. I gripped the counter to steady myself. "You brought her into our bed." Brian looked away. The marriage was already dead. That sentence killed something in me. Not the marriage. That had clearly been dead long before I found out. It killed my last instinct to protect him. He packed 2 bags before midnight and left. He didn't take furniture, photos, or anything that suggested he thought he had lost the home. He took just enough to make a point. He was not leaving because he had been caught. He was leaving because he believed I would be forced out next. I called Michelle that night. She didn't answer. I texted one word. Why? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. She never replied. The next morning, Brian sent an email saying he wanted all communication in writing. He said we had both been unhappy for a long time and that he hoped the divorce could be handled with dignity. Then he wrote, "Please don't harass Michelle. She is not the reason this marriage failed." That was the first time I truly hated him. Not because he cheated, but because he wanted me to protect the woman he cheated with. For the first 2 weeks, I barely slept. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching things I had chosen, bought, fought for, and paid for. I stood under the tall living room windows and remembered crying the day the glass was installed because the house finally looked real. Brian used to call it our greatest project. During the divorce, the word "our" disappeared. Suddenly, everything was his. His land, his family property, his legal advantage, his house. I thought the affair would be the worst part. I was wrong. The affair broke my heart. The divorce taught me how carefully Brian had positioned himself to take everything. He hired Paul, a divorce attorney with a reputation for being calm, expensive, and ruthless without ever raising his voice. My lawyer warned me right away. He's going to make this about the land. But I paid for most of the house, I said. She looked at me with the kind of pity professionals try to hide. You paid for improvements on land that was never legally yours. The land was protected through Brian's family paperwork. I had known that in a vague way, the same way you know there are pipes behind walls without thinking about where they go. I knew the lot came from his family. I knew documents existed. I knew Brian said it was handled. What I did not understand was how completely that paperwork could erase me. In court, Paul made it sound simple. The land had belonged to Brian before the marriage. It had never been purchased with marital funds. The home was built onto that land, which made separating the value complicated. My lawyer showed bank records, transfers, construction invoices, and proof that my income had carried most of the build. The judge listened. That was what made it hurt more. He listened, reviewed the documents, and still ruled mostly in Brian's favor. I was given a buyout, but the amount was insulting compared to what I had poured into that place. It did not cover my savings, my overtime, my bonuses, or the years I spent building a home I thought I would grow old in. The court gave Brian the house. I had 30 days to leave. After the ruling, Brian followed me into the hallway. "I don't want this to get ugly," he said. I looked at him. "You already made it ugly." The judge ruled. "You need to accept that. Accept. Be mature. Don't be bitter. Don't make a scene." People use those words when they want you to swallow something rotten and thank them for the plate. I went home and started packing. At first, I worked like a normal person. Books, clothes, kitchen things, old photo albums, the ceramic bowl my father bought me before he died. Then grief slowed everything down. I would open a drawer and lose 10 minutes staring at nothing. I would fold one sweater, sit on the floor, and forget what I had been doing. My mother, Carol, called every day. "Come stay with me," she said. "You shouldn't be alone in that house." "I need to pack." "You need to breathe." "I'll breathe when I'm out." She hated that answer, and so did I. On the 15th night after the ruling, I was sitting in the living room surrounded by half-sealed boxes when my phone lit up. Michelle. For one stupid second, I thought she might apologize. Her message said, "Hey, I know things are tense, but since you're already packing, could you leave the living room curtains? They fit the windows perfectly, and replacing them would be such a headache." Then another message appeared. Brian said it shouldn't matter since they were made for the house anyway. I stared at the screen until my grief went quiet. Not gone. Quiet. There is a difference. Grief makes you collapse. Quiet makes you focus. Michelle did not want curtains. She wanted proof that she could step into my life and keep the parts she liked. I walked into the living room and looked at them. Heavy linen, custom length, made to soften the cold shine of the glass wall I had fought so hard to afford. They had cost too much, like almost everything else in that house, but I loved them because they made the place feel human. Brian was going to keep the house. Michelle was going to decorate it. And I was supposed to leave cleanly, quietly, and gratefully. That was the night I stopped thinking like a wounded wife and started thinking like someone who understood systems. I did not want a reckless revenge that could be photographed, reported, or fixed in an afternoon. Broken glass would make me look unstable. Damaged walls would make me liable. Anything obvious would only give Brian another story where I was the villain and he was the victim. A house is more than walls and floors. It is air, heat, moisture, fabric, pressure, and time. Most people only notice what a house looks like. I understood how invisible things move through a space. I finished packing a box. Then another. I labeled everything neatly and made a list of what I would take and what I would leave. Michelle wanted the curtains. I decided she could have them. Brian wanted the house. I decided he could have that too. For a while. Brian stayed away during my final week. He sent another email saying he wanted to give me space to transition peacefully, as if I were leaving a job instead of being pushed out of my home after his affair. Michelle texted twice more. First, she asked if I was taking the large entryway mirror. Then she said, I really hope we can all be civil someday. There is a special kind of cruelty in people who take everything and still expect to be seen as kind. To anyone watching, I was just an exhausted woman packing after a divorce. I donated clothes, returned a borrowed ladder to Rebecca next door, scheduled a cleaning service, and took photos of each room after my boxes were gone. My lawyer told me to document the condition. The house looked perfect. That mattered. I needed Brian to walk through it and see nothing but victory. I had already decided to leave behind a problem. I won't pretend it was a prank. It was deliberate, cold, and cruel. I also won't describe it like a manual because even now I understand how ugly it was. I used ordinary things in places no one would question. Decorative fixtures. Hidden gaps. Areas that looked harmless because people like Brian and Michelle only paid attention to surfaces. The issue could be removed later without permanent damage, but only by someone who knew exactly where to look. During the final cleaning, I moved through each room with music playing softly from my phone. I wiped counters, vacuumed corners, cleaned the glass, and made sure the curtains hung exactly right. By the time I finished, the house looked ready for a magazine shoot. On my last morning there, Brian arrived for the walkthrough. He wore a pale blue shirt Michelle had once said looked good on him, and I hated myself for noticing. He walked through the rooms with his phone in his hand, checking closets, lights, sinks, and corners like a landlord inspecting a rental. He even ran one finger across the kitchen island to check for dust. Looks fine, he said. Fine. I gave him the garage remotes, spare keys, and instructions for transferring the smart home controls. Michelle arrived 10 minutes later with sunglasses on top of her head and a coffee cup in her hand. She stepped through the front door like she had been invited to a showing. Her eyes went straight to the curtains. You left them, she said. I smiled. They belong with the house. Brian frowned slightly. My calm bothered him more than anger would have. Michelle touched the fabric like it was already hers. This is better for everyone, she said. I picked up my last box. Is it? Her smile faltered. For the first time since everything happened, she looked nervous. Amanda, I know you hate me. I adjusted my grip on the box. Hate takes more energy than you're worth. Brian snapped, don't start. I looked at him. I'm done. Then I walked out. My new apartment was small, plain, and depressing in a way that felt personal. The carpet smelled like old dust no matter how many times I cleaned it. The kitchen drawer stuck. The bathroom fan rattled every time I turned it on. The first night there, I ate crackers on the floor because I had not unpacked plates yet. That was when the grief came back, heavy and quiet. I missed my house. I missed who I had been inside it. For almost 2 weeks, nothing happened. I went to work, came home, ignored mutual friends, and tried not to look at pictures of the house on my phone. Then Stephanie called. Stephanie always knew things without admitting how she knew them. I probably shouldn't tell you this, she said. Then don't. They had a housewarming. I closed my eyes. Of course they did. She posted pictures. Champagne, candles, that big patio. A caption about new beginnings. I waited for pain to hit. It came, but from far away, like thunder miles off. What did people say? I asked. Stephanie hesitated. Do you really want to know? No. She told me anyway. Michelle had joked that the house finally had lighter energy. Brian made a toast about moving forward. Someone asked if I was okay, and Michelle said she hoped I would heal enough to be happy for them someday. I looked around my apartment at the half-empty boxes and the cheap lamp flickering in the corner. Then I opened the weather app on my phone. A heat wave was coming. For days of brutal Georgia humidity. I set the phone down and slept better than I had in weeks. The first call came at 1:17 in the morning. Brian. I woke up to my phone buzzing against the nightstand. I watched his name flash until it stopped. It started again. On the fourth call I answered. What? His breathing was sharp. What did you do? My voice came out rough from sleep. It's 1 in the morning. What did you do to the house? There it was. Not triumph exactly. Confirmation. What are you talking about? I asked. The smell, he said. Don't act stupid. It's everywhere. In the background, Michelle was crying. Not soft crying. Panicked crying. Brian lowered his voice, which only made him sound angrier. She's throwing up. We can't sleep. It smells like something died in the walls. I let the silence stretch. Amanda. You had the walkthrough, I said. You checked everything. It started after you left. Then maybe something happened after I left. You know what this is. I know you called me at 1 in the morning to complain about your house. He went silent. That word landed. You think this is funny? He asked. No. I think it's sad that your new beginning has maintenance issues. Michelle said something in the background, and Brian snapped at her to stop. I hung up and blocked his number. The next few weeks reached me in pieces. Stephanie told me some. Rebecca next door told me more, claiming she wasn't trying to gossip, but repair trucks kept blocking her driveway. At first, Brian blamed the plumbing. He hired Kevin, who checked the drains and lines, but found nothing serious. Then Brian blamed the air system and called Steven to inspect controls, vents, and electrical components. Filters were replaced. The smart home alerts kept warning about air quality. No one found a clear source. That was what broke them. The smell did not behave like a normal smell. On cooler mornings, it faded enough to make them question themselves. By afternoon, when heat pressed against the windows, it bloomed again. Some days it seemed strongest in the living room. Other days it drifted into bedrooms and closets. Opening windows made the humidity worse. Running the air moved it faster. It got into fabric. Curtains, clothes, bedding, everything. Michelle threw away sheets and accused Brian of being too cheap to hire the right experts. Brian accused her of exaggerating because the house was no longer a perfect trophy. At a dinner I did not attend, Michelle apparently drank too much and said, I swear that house is punishing me. I should not have smiled when Stephanie told me. I did. By the second month, the house had become the center of Brian and Michelle's entire relationship. Not love. Not excitement. Not the thrill of sneaking around and calling it destiny. Just the smell, the bills, and the arguments. Michelle started sleeping downtown. First, she said it was only one night because she had a headache. Then it became 2 nights. Then a week. Brian stayed because he could not afford not to. The mortgage was heavy. The legal bills had hurt him more than he admitted, and the repairs were bleeding him slowly. He hired cleaners, then a restoration crew, then another inspector who suggested opening parts of the walls. They cut, searched, patched, and cut again. They found problems, but never the problem. Brian kept looking for disaster, a pipe, mold, a dead animal, hidden water damage. He never looked at the pretty things Michelle had begged me to leave. He never questioned the surfaces. Michelle unraveled faster than he did. She stopped inviting people over, deleted the housewarming pictures, and told one friend the place had bad energy. When someone joked that maybe guilt had a smell, she stopped speaking to them. By the 4th month, everyone knew Brian's perfect house had become unlivable. Contractors came and went. Michelle stayed in hotels. Brian looked exhausted whenever anyone saw him. Rebecca told me once, in the grocery store, that she had seen him sitting on the front steps at midnight with his head in his hands. That poor man, she said. Something is very wrong with that house. I nodded. That's awful. I went back to my apartment and sat in the dark for a long time. That was the first time satisfaction started to crack. Not because I suddenly forgave him. I didn't. But hearing it from someone outside the betrayal made the damage feel less contained. It was no longer just Brian and Michelle inside my private revenge. Other people were watching, guessing, worrying, and stepping around the edges of what I had done. Then Michelle left him. Their final fight was loud enough for Rebecca to hear from her yard. Michelle called him a failure. Brian called her selfish. She said she had given up everything for him. He said she had given up nothing except the ability to enjoy stolen curtains. That line spread by sunset. 2 days later, Michelle packed her things and moved into a hotel full-time. A week after that, she was gone. No apology. No message to me. No dramatic explanation. She simply disappeared from the house she had called our place. Brian lasted another month. By then, he was behind on payments, buried in repair bills, and sleeping in his car some nights because the house made him sick. The home he had fought so hard to take had turned into a financial trap with glass walls. When the listing appeared online, Stephanie sent me the link without a message. The photos were still beautiful if you didn't know the truth. Sunlight through glass. Clean lines. Wide rooms. A perfect patio. Then came the disclosure. Persistent odor issue. Source unknown. Sold as is. Price adjusted for remediation. I sat down at my tiny kitchen table and read it twice. The price was low. Not low enough. For weeks, nobody bought it. People toured once and never came back. Agents whispered. The price dropped, then dropped again. Brian's desperation became public, one reduction at a time. That was when I called Ryan. Ryan was my cousin, and he understood real estate better than anyone in our family. I told him Brian's house was on the market under distress, and I wanted it back if my name could stay out of the offer until the deal closed. He was quiet for a while. Amanda, is there something you need to tell me? Yes. Is it illegal? I looked around my apartment. I don't know what answer makes this conversation better. He sighed. Then I told him enough. Not every detail. Enough. Ryan did not react the way my mother later would. He said, that is either the worst thing you've ever done or the smartest. Can you help me? I can help you buy a house. That's all I'm agreeing to. He arranged the offer through a company name Brian would not recognize. Clean paperwork. No contingencies. Cash. Low enough to be painful, high enough to beat foreclosure. Brian accepted in less than a day. When Ryan called to tell me, I was standing in my apartment laundry room holding a basket of damp towels. I had imagined that moment so many times. I thought I would cry or laugh. Instead, I leaned against the dryer and said, okay. Getting the house back did not feel like winning yet. It felt like opening a door I had locked from the outside and realizing I still had to walk through it. The morning I got the keys back, I drove to the house before sunrise. I didn't bring furniture or boxes. I brought gloves, cleaning supplies, replacement fixtures, and a change of clothes. From the driveway, the house was still beautiful. The glass caught the pale morning light. The trees framed it perfectly. But up close, the damage showed. Scuffed walls. Bad patches. Dust in the corners. Dead plants near the front steps. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell hit me immediately. Even knowing what it was, I had to cover my mouth. It was stale, sour, and thick with months of trapped heat and panic. The kind of smell that makes a house feel less like shelter and more like a warning. I stood there for a moment, breathing through my sleeve. Then I got to work. The first source was exactly where I had left it. The beautiful fixtures Michelle wanted to keep came down one by one. I did not examine them or linger over them. I carried them out, loaded them into my car, and got rid of them. Then I handled the hidden air problem. It took less than an hour. That was the part that would have destroyed Brian if he had known. Months of experts, thousands of dollars, a ruined relationship, a distressed sale, and the Betrayal fix required only one thing he never had: the right understanding of the house. By noon, every window was open. By evening, the worst of the smell had started to loosen. By the third day, the house smelled like bleach, dust, and fresh air. Then it smelled like mine. I replaced what needed replacing with cheaper pieces from a local hardware store. They did not match the original design, but I liked them more because they did not carry Michelle's fingerprints. I scrubbed the floors myself. I cleaned the kitchen island twice. I washed the walls where contractors had left smudges. The main bedroom took the longest. Not because of Brian. Because of the woman I had been when I found the earring. I could still see her sitting on the edge of the bed, holding that tiny piece of proof, waiting for a lie kind enough to soften the truth. I wish I could tell her to leave sooner. I wish I could tell her never to build on land she didn't own. I wish I could tell her that love without protection can become a signature on your own loss. But I can't. All I can do is live in the house she paid for and refuse to apologize for wanting it back. My mother found out 2 weeks later. Carol came over with groceries because that is how she handles emotions she doesn't want to name. She walked through the front door, looked around, and frowned. "It's gone," she said. "What?" "The smell." I carried the bags into the kitchen. "Yes." She looked at me. "How?" I should have lied. I could have said Ryan found a better contractor. I could have said the previous inspectors missed something obvious. I could have said the house just needed air. Instead, I told her enough of the truth. Her face changed while I talked. Confusion became disbelief, then fear. Not fear of the house. Fear of me. "Amanda," she said quietly, "tell me you're exaggerating." "I'm not." "You made the house unlivable on purpose?" "I made sure Brian couldn't enjoy what he stole." "That is not the same thing." "It felt the same when I was packing boxes." She gripped the edge of the counter. "You manipulated the value of a property." You drove him into debt. You let people spend months trying to fix something you created. The court let him take almost everything I built. The court being unfair does not make this right. I hated that she sounded calm. It would have been easier if she yelled. I didn't hurt him, I said. You don't believe that. That shut me up. Because the worst part is, I didn't know if I did. Brian lost money. Michelle left him. The house came back to me at a fraction of what it was worth. Those are facts. But hurt is not always bruises or broken bones. Sometimes it is fear, debt, humiliation, exhaustion, and the slow realization that the thing you stole has turned against you. My mother saw that before I wanted to. She stepped back from the counter. I don't know who taught you to be this cold. I almost said he did. But that would have been too easy. Brian did not create me from nothing. He revealed what I was capable of when cornered. Carol left without taking off her coat. For 2 days, I told myself she was being dramatic. Then Ryan called. She's upset, he said. She thinks I'm a monster. She thinks you scared her. I sat on the patio, looking at the yard Brian had neglected. Do you? Ryan took a long breath. I think you got your house back. That's not what I asked. I know. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then he said, be careful what victory turns into. I hated that because it sounded too much like wisdom, and I was not ready for wisdom. I was ready to sit in my house. I was ready to sleep in a bedroom that no longer belonged to Betrayal. I was ready to make coffee in the kitchen I paid for. So that is what I did. The house slowly became ordinary again, and ordinary felt like luxury. I bought new curtains, simple ones Michelle would have hated. I planted herbs near the patio door. I fixed chipped paint in the hallway. I donated the last few things Brian had left behind. One afternoon, I found an old photo tucked in the back of a drawer. Me, Brian, and Michelle at a barbecue 2 summers before the divorce. Brian had his arm around my waist. Michelle was leaning into me, laughing at something outside the frame. I stared at it for a long time. Then I tore it once, right through the space between me and them. I threw their side away. I kept mine. Brian tried to contact me once through an email account I had forgotten to block. The subject line said, "You know what you did." The message was short. He wrote that I had destroyed him, that Michelle was gone, that the house had ruined his finances, and that he hoped I enjoyed living inside the proof of what kind of person I really was. There was no apology. Nothing about the affair. Nothing about the court. Nothing about Michelle asking for my curtains while I packed my life into boxes. Just blame. I deleted it. Then I made tea, walked out to the patio, and sat under the evening sky until the house behind me settled into silence. Maybe my mother is right. Maybe I crossed a line decent people are supposed to fear. Maybe justice is not supposed to look this much like revenge. Maybe getting back what was mine does not erase the ugliness of how I did it. But Brian used my trust as a blueprint, and Michelle used my grief as a welcome mat. They stood inside the life I built and asked me to leave the curtains. So I did. I left the curtains, the keys, and a problem they were too arrogant to find. When the house finally came back to me, I opened every window and let the air decide what still belonged here. Now my family is split. My mother says I became cruel. Ryan says Brian should have read the fine print of betrayal. Stephanie says she would never admit it out loud, but she understands. As for me, I sit here at night, listening to the city hum in the distance, and I feel peace mixed with something heavier. I earned this house back in a way I can never fully explain without watching someone's face change. So, did I become the villain when I turned the house against them, or did I just make sure the people who stole my life couldn't afford to keep it?